This video is presented by Prompton Real Estate Services.
Presale versus apartment. Which one should you buy?
Pre-sale market was amazing.
That's crazy. 6 years.
Hundreds of millions of dollars, potentially $1 billion.
Often a lot of problems. Management.
3 golden words in real estate: location, location, location.
We're joined here by Brian Higgins, who's been practicing residential real estate for over 12 years and has brokered nearly $1 billion in sales in the real estate in the Vancouver market in the residential space. And today, you're gonna teach us everything we need to know about choosing between pre-sales and resales. What is a pre-sale and what is a resale?
Basically, when we talk resale, it's existing homes that are currently on the market. Idea of pre-sale is a developer buying land, going through a development permit, building permit, and then pre-selling that block of units that they're going to be potentially building to prospective purchasers.
And then for pre-sales, most of the times they're like 3 years, 4 years out from being completed if you purchase it at the beginning of their sales state.
For sure, or longer. I mean, you look at some of the big sites in Vancouver, that can potentially take 6 years.
For me, when I'm always looking at this real estate, I'm thinking, why would I ever hold my cash in something I would wait 6 years for instead of just putting it into an investment where I can have cash flow right now?
And at the end of the day, pre-sale can be a good investment, but you really got to understand all the risks that go with it, because there can be government changes, there can be market transitions, there can be a lot of impacts. So, what you bought for years back may not turn out to be what it's worth in today's dollars. And investment, people typically look at real estate on a long-term investment as being a safe place for money.
If there's so much risk in investing in pre-sales, what are the advantages of investing in pre-sales?
There, again, not all, but I mean, you look at certain ones and we see pre-US recession, the pre-sale market was amazing, right? The pre-sale market in Vancouver, the developers would have lineups around the block. You'd have 800 people wanting to buy 400 condos in person, and 3 years later or 2.5 years later when the site was done, the property would be worth 50% more than what it was when you first bought it at pre-sale. The challenge now is that if you look at some of the big site on pre-sale, the numbers that it closes at may be actually underneath what you bought it at 6 years ago. So you could be at negative numbers, not.
So the reason that people bought pre-sales is because there was such a high margin in the increase in their value.
For the most part, for a number of years, if not probably well over a decade, that's typically how pre-sale worked.
Right. And does it work like that because pre-sales give a better price because it hasn't been built yet?
Some of the developers looked at profit margins differently than they do now. So it's difficult because I think when you look at construction costs nowadays, when you look at holding costs, when you look at opportunity of capital, a lot of the pre-sale projects, they're tough to see the big wins like we saw previously.
Pre-sales, I know for developers or anyone who already has money in real estate and trying to make more money, developers are gonna always make more money doing a pre-sale than selling existing houses.
Well, typically the developers hedge their bet by getting the pre-sale buyers to purchase, and then they go after construction financing. So when you get into larger side, we're talking multi-unit, stratified properties. But it's tough because you're potentially looking at huge numbers at the end, hundreds of millions of dollars, potentially $1 billion, on some of the large sites. So it's different because the developers, if you look at it, in essence, they're hedging their numbers and guaranteeing those at completion so they can have their whole pro forma work for them. The pre-sale purchaser doesn't have that same pro forma. They're buying a stack of papers written by the developer's lawyers for the developer and hoping what they saw at that pre-sale center is going to be what's delivered to them years later.
There's often a lot of problems in some buildings. Floods, you have other bad management.
Yeah, there's a lot of risk. So purchasers can do well at pre-sale, but purchasers need to be informed and really make sure that when they're buying, they're working with the right agents and not an agent that's getting a very large commission from the developer.
If the incentive now is not to make a lot of money on pre-sales, what are the other incentives? Why should anyone buy pre-sales now if it's not to make more money?
What are the 3 golden words in real estate? Location, location, location. So if you're in West Vancouver, for example, and you had a waterfront site down on Bellevue come up, the demand to be on Bellevue down there, one would buy it because you want to be there. So your drive to be there is because you live in the neighborhood. You look at the Grosvenor site over there. You look at some of the other sales in West Vancouver, there's a crowd that wants to stay within their community. We've seen that throughout too. Bosa did that in North Van by Lynn Valley. Grosvenor did it again in Edgemont Village. So it's different because if you're buying pre-sale for the reason for you to reside there, you're not looking at it like you're gambling or as an investment. You're buying a home for yourself.
Right.
Other people look at pre-sale as an opportunity to make money, and now your risk potentially could be different. Your outcome could be different.
what's the difference from buying a resale for location?
Realistically, it's tough too, because if you look at the downtown core of Vancouver, so much of the downtown waterfront has been built out. There's so few of the good waterfront sites left at the end of the day. You can buy resale, a few blocks away at really good numbers.
Talking about good location, a lot of the resale ones, the homeowners probably don't want to sell, or they're going to sell for a really high price because it's so rare. And the only way for someone to come in and swoop in on such a good location is if you come in with a lot of cash, which only developers can do.
Sometimes it's almost deal specific though. I've got the Harbor Green 2 sub penthouse listed right now in foreclosure at $12.25 million. When you look at it on paper, that's an incredible opportunity for somebody to take out the entire floor in one of the most exclusive buildings that Vancouver will have built at a little over $2,100 a square foot. A developer doing pre-sale right now is going to start the pre-sale project downtown at over $2,500 a square foot, and you're going to be nowhere near the water. So if you're looking for value, there could be a good opportunity in the existing resale market for sure.
How many categories of buyers do you think there are, and how would each category choose between the two?
Typically, a lot of the pre-sale was bought as investment. Right, especially from the big boys in terms of the big developers in Vancouver. They built a lot of one bedrooms, very easy buys for investors and what have you. So it's different because depending on market cycles and the appetite of the market, the pre-sale buyers can vary. Like if you're talking Millennium Village down on the waterfront of Falls Creek, you had a lot of end users that wanted 2,000 square foot suites. When Millennium sold Canada House, or Rennie sold Canada House for them, those were special properties, right? We haven't seen many of those come back to the resale market because people were buying those to live in. If it's a smaller unit, often more investor based.
How do I get educated between which is the better choice? Because I know a lot of real estate agents often get very big bonuses from developers on pre-sales.
If you're a consumer, you want to make sure you really understand what it is that you're purchasing and have somebody walk you through the possible risks that can occur between now and possibly the next 6 years from now too. So there's a lot of questions you need answered correctly.
Would you say there's a certain amount of cash that a buyer would be working with where it would be more advantageous somehow to do over a pre-sale or a resale?
You got to look at where somebody is potentially in their career. In Vancouver with the cost of real estate, often younger purchasers are going back to their family and helping them get them in the market. I think when you look at the metrics of Vancouver, we're an intake city. It's a population that's going to continue to grow. So at the end of the day, for myself, I bought my first property when I was 24 years old. I bought it in Cole Harbor. It turned out really well. And 13 years later, what allowed us to step our way up the ladder and get into our forever home. Purchasers, you want to look at where you are in your possible career years. If you're coming out of university, if you had any student loans and that sort of thing, that can impact financing later. A lot of people are using the bank of mom and dad, right? So, realistically, the other challenge too is if you're buying a property when you're younger, you might meet somebody, you could get married, kids can happen. So life changes can also cause transactions to occur at the end of the day. So you want to be a bit smart about what you can do, but also make sure you can afford what it is that you're buying.
Whether you're a first-time buyer, seasoned investor, or ready to sell, Prompton Real Estate Services is your go-to partner in Vancouver. Their market knowledge, personalized service, and commitment to success set them apart. Take the next step with confidence. Visit Prompton.com and let Prompton Real Estate Services help you achieve your real estate goals.
First-time home buyers, we have our buyers looking to upgrade or transition, and we have our people who have become investors. How would you say each of these categories should look at it when they're choosing between the two options? So first is the first-time home buyers.
If I'm a first-time buyer, maybe I'll go slightly outside of my initial search area because I might find opportunity that could be a little less costly, but could have potential good growth later on, right? So if I was researching, I would look at possible government infrastructure projects. Is there potential rapid transit lines that could come in? You look at the BC government, in this past summer announcing the transit-oriented development. That will change a lot of potential land. To me, that's opportunity that the money invested there could do really, really well.
Probably a lot of first-time home buyers are probably looking at resale more often than a pre-sale just because of their mindset and how they think time is passing.
Yeah, true. And I mean, the one thing with the resale market is that GST is not applicable, right? So when you buy pre-sale, you're looking at that price plus closing costs at the end of the day. The resale market, you won't have that. A lot of the younger generation, with all of the technology and the way we're being shaped nowadays, it's the have now. So I don't know if I was 25, 26, or 28 years old with the idea that I'm going to wait till I'm 34 for this project to complete. I need a place to live right now at the end of the day. So I think the younger sect, if I was a buyer, I would definitely look at the resale market, because I could probably move in 30 days from now and live in my own property, not be renting somebody else's.
What do you think transitioners are looking at more often, pre-sales or resale?
Depends how good of a planner they are, and depends where they are in their life perspective at the end of the day. You know, the upsizers are upsizing for a reason that's more immediate, right? Possibly marriage, possibly larger space, family coming into equation with kids. You need more space. So you're more at that point in life, quicker to transact because you need the now. Some of the downsizers on the other end of the spectrum, if they're coming in from elsewhere within Canada and they're wanting to live in Vancouver because we are the California of Canada, at the end of the day, we don't get the cold winters, maybe they're planning and they're willing to wait, 2 years, 3 years, because they have things to deal with, where they currently are. So I think a lot of it comes down to how one plans.
And our last category is the people who are real estate investors. Well, there's definitely people who are more entry real estate investors and people who are seasoned real investors.
Yeah.
How are they looking at these two options?
I would say for the seasoned investors, going back to it, I would be studying OCP, right, the official community plans. I would be looking at opportunity, where I'm going to place money and how that money is going to grow based on, as Grant Murray from the Concord Pacific, the vice president of sales, always says, OPM, other people's money. Typically, transit lines can be great. You look at what's happening out in Langley right now. There's been a huge amount of development that's happening out the Fraser Valley. So it's different, because I think if I'm an investor currently, I would not invest in a pre-sale in downtown. I would take that same opportunity, like let's say a $1.5 million one bedroom downtown. I would go sprinkle that in probably 3 other sub areas. And I think that the overall returns of that would be far more significant. And the other aspect too, if I'm an investor, I don't think I go for the top tier product. I had a lot of investment properties throughout the 2000s, myself downtown, and I found that the returns on more of the starter one bedrooms was always better. The rent was always guaranteed. So I would not go for the big home runs. I would play the solid singles all day long, and at the end of the day, they'll win the game.
As a person who gets a lot and builds, was that also part of resale investing?
Gets a lot and builds. I think we're going to see a lot more multi-generational living moving forward. So I think you're going to see a whole new way a lot of builders start to cater to multi-generational. I think that's a great opportunity in throughout Vancouver. Building is expensive though. You look at the amount of insolvencies right now in this inflationary time, you have to know what you're doing, because you can get wiped out really quick in a soft market.
Right. How often do celebrities buy pre-sales, or like people of, influence?
There's definitely been a few, for sure. It's tough because Canada, with the foreign buyer ban, you don't get some of that same influence, right? We had a lot of American actors in that in Vancouver previously, a lot of household names for sure. If you're buying pre-sale and you've got capacity, you're wanting something new. It's like a new car. You go to the car dealership, or you go to, autotrader.com, you're probably more excited going to the car dealership. You find that new fancy car, it's got all the bells and whistles. You want to take it home and show your friends. Pre-sale is kind of like a new car at the end of the day, but unfortunately, maybe you don't get to drive it for 6 years.
Right now, I've seen some pre-sales that have finished completed building and they're so vacant. If we're looking at these buildings, should we wait for a building to not be able to sell and then buy it? Isn't that better?
Possibly, but the challenge with that is that the homeowner that bought that at pre-sale, many don't like to sell for negative numbers. So they may hold on for 10, 15, 20 years just so that they don't lose at the end of the day.
Well, I'm saying the ones where it actually doesn't sell at all, like the developer is still holding the units. Would it be cheaper or more expensive after completion?
Typically, it'll be more expensive, because if you think about it, the developer is going to look at they're going to have their final construction numbers done at the end of the day. And if it's been built in the last 3 years, you ask any major developer, their construction costs went up dramatically. So therefore, they have to factor in the sales of the new condos that they may have left over as opportunity for them to have to incur additional costs, and therefore the prices definitely doesn't go down.
But that's assuming that the building is great. But if the building is not so great, you could pick up some deals?
True, but most of the buildings, when you look to it, especially on the big stuff, most of them were sold out, right, at the end of the day. So very little developer leftover inventory. Even the ones, typically, if you're looking for a deal, if I'm a deal hunter, I will look at a site and I will look towards the assignment market within a few months of closing, because sometimes the purchaser can't close, they can't get their financing. And I think that's where the deals happen.
So right now, let's say as someone to choose between pre-sale and resale, what are the 5 questions you would ask them to seriously consider before they choose between the 2 options?
First, how long you're going to live in the property for?
How does that affect their choice?
Because at the end of the day, it's going to affect their dollars, right? If you're going to be able to, if you look at market cycles in real estate, typically, you know, until we went through COVID, a real estate cycle was often 6 to 7 years. So often when we're talking with clients, it's about a 10-year hold, right? If you're going to transact inside of that, buying and selling your own real estate is expensive. So typically, how long you're going to hold the property for. If it's a resale product, then we're going to talk a lot about, you know, buildings in terms of construction, and what we do with clients is we try and mitigate a lot of risk for them and help them understand that they don't need to buy the newest or the most expensive, but they need to buy something that's fundamentally sound. We do live in a temperate rainforest.
What? We do?
We live in a temperate rainforest. Exactly.
What does that mean?
Well, Vancouver gets a lot of precipitation, and what's bad on buildings? Water.
Okay.
So if you think about it from that end of it, if you buy something, you know, that I'll explain it this way. People, when they talk about the leaky condos, they talk about Fairview, right, in the 1980s. Now let's look at the 1990s construction in Vancouver, because that will be the next leaky condo fiasco.
Right. So number 1, how long are you going to live there? Number 2?
Number 2, location. Number 3, if I'm using it.
What do you mean by location? What do they need it for? Schools?
Lifestyle,
work?
School, possibly, yeah. Have they studied the OCPs of where they're buying, the official community plan? Because that's going to benefit their understanding of what's happening in the location.
That's rough. You're going to tell a buyer to study the...
Well, I'm gonna study it for them, and then I'm going to explain to them what they need to be aware of.
Okay. Number 3?
Which way does it face? If you're north facing, you'll never see the sun.
Okay.
If you're south facing, then you'll see the sun.
Okay.
East, you'll get morning sunrise. West, you'll get afternoon sunsets. So at the end of the day, what is important to them in terms of light in a home?
Right.
Yeah,
And also in a pre-sale, you're only getting one direction.
Sometimes it's tough at pre-sale because you only get handed one file, right? If there's 5,000 purchasers to buy 500 units, if you get a file, you're lucky.
Right. Number 4?
I would also, if I'm buying pre-sale, I would look into the developer's history. So have they been around? Have they built? What have they built? How has that stood up? Have there been problems? Are there lawsuits in past buildings?
And again, is this something the buyer looks into or the agent
We're
looks
probably going
into?
to explain to them.
Okay. And number 5?
Make sure you can close, because if you can't close, you're in trouble.
Close on the buyer side financially.
If you're buying a pre-sale, right, you need to make sure that 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, maybe 7 years when that property is done, you have the ability to close. Because that disclosure statement is not written for you, the purchaser. It's written by the developer's lawyers for the developer.
These should be actually more questions the buyer should be asking the professionals.
There's hundreds and hundreds of questions the buyer should be plowing into, because it's very easy in pre-sale to get caught up in hype.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Brian. How do we find what you're all about?
Yeah, you can find me at yvrglobal.com or on Instagram, BrianHiggins_prec. Yeah, real estate's a lot of fun. It's been a passion for a long time, and if you're looking for the right agent,